Hello, everyone out there, and welcome to another OrionX webinar. This one is how to create a podcast series. And I'm Dan Olds, and joined here by Shaheen Khan. How are you, Shaheen?
Excellent, and thank you all for joining. As you saw from our announcement, Dan and I have been doing podcasts for a number of years. He more than I, probably more than 500 episodes between us. So we thought maybe this is not a bad time to share what we've learned and get some perspectives from you.
And this is a pretty good time to start podcasting because there's a lot of people at home. They have time on their hands, although we all seem to think we don't. We do. And today we're going to talk about the power of the podcast and the 6 steps, not 7. At one time we thought there were 7, but we corrected that. The 6 steps to podcasting success. Podcasting and human marketing, then of course take some questions from the audience. So if you have questions, please type them in the box and we will get to them towards the end of the podcast.
Right, and we also had some written questions that came as part of the registration, and we'll go through them as many as we can. Also, these 6 steps, of course, every one of them, if you double click on it, you'll get another half a dozen steps to really go through it. The power of the podcast, as Dana was saying, there is in fact a thought that now that everybody's at home a lot, maybe we don't have as much time to listen to podcasts, but the stats seem to show otherwise. The stats seem to show that people actually do listen at home a lot to podcasts.
And these are recent stats that something like 69% of people listen to podcasts at home.
Right. Move forward, Dano, or do you want to go through all right, let's do it. Okay, the power of the pod, you got it.
Okay, spreading your message, of course, right? Number 1, educating, particularly customers, particularly in technical fields, giving them the perspective of technology, your perspective of technology, very important. You also, through this, you're able to engage a prospect, engage their interest, and develop a relationship with them. They get to know your company as a personality. And that's really important because that can engender a lot of loyalty. It's also a great way to respond to the news, right?
It totally is. Fundamentally, it's another avenue, another channel to reach your community and to strengthen your community. And in fact, our next webinar next time about this time is going to be all focused about community building and all the high-end and low-end ways of doing that. But it's a different relationship. You do, in fact, develop a different relationship through podcast. And also it gives you a lot of content for derivative material and SEO and such. And at the end, it's a good emotional attachment to your community and a good way to add an item to your marketing mix.
I mean, it is part of the standard marketing mix now. So
it truly is. Yeah.
Yes. But it's crowded, so you need to be able to rise above the clutter out there. And by the way, I just have to mention one thing. Shaheen's using a false background on his video, and every couple of seconds when he moves, it looks like his shoulder disappears. Shaheen does have 2 real shoulders.
I didn't even know my video was visible, but anywho.
Anyway, let's drive on. So we've kind of broken down the components of a podcast into what you need to do one time and what you do ongoing. And we're going to go into these steps, not in this form, but we're going to touch on each one of these. But real quickly, it's coming up with the right concept. It's designing that podcast personality. It's figuring out your back end for distribution and developing a workflow that you can repeat time and time again.
Yeah, so the concept really is you're doing a radio show, essentially. So you need to decide, is this a news show, a comedy show, a quiz show? That would be an analogy that kind of puts you in the right frame of mind to decide what sort of concept you want to have. And that's a concept that wants to stick with the program. If you are going to have a program that's going to be comedy one time, news another time, well, you better be deliberate about that as well. But once you have the concept, then you can go through the rest of the things. This is basically what we do with the clients that are wanting to do a podcast series, is to try to say, okay, these are the things you need to do one time. And the bottom line, the bottom portion of the slide is what you need to do per each episode and on an ongoing basis. And that's to develop your content, figure out who your guests might be, an editorial calendar, come up with all the derivative content that you're going to make out of the podcast. The podcast is a great source of info. So you have you have an audio track, you can add slides to it and turn it into a video. You can transcribe
turn it into a blog. And all of that gives you the opportunity to reach new audiences. If you've got a guest, reach new SEO targets. If you've got new topic that you cover, and then you go through the production, the promotion, and then the metrics of how you did and how you even interpret the metrics that you do or do not get. And we're going to be touching on all of these topics as we go.
Right.
So step one, which is, as I like to call it, the first step, defining your goals and targets. So what would a successful podcast look like to you? What would your goals be? And who's your target audience? Those are two questions that have to be answered right away. You can't go general on this. You can't just say successful podcast, one that has success associated with it. You have to have some metrics, you have to have some goals, and your target market needs to be specific as well. It can't just be people who are interested in technology, for example.
Yeah, and candidly, no different than blogging. The success that you should expect is really a function of the size of the company and the size of the existing community and the topic, how hot or not hot the topic is, and all of that plays a role. If you want to develop an audience, and we're going to talk about that later, because usually the number of people who listen to this shows up as a big metric. And if you're a startup and you're doing this podcast, well, then maybe if you get 50 people to listen to it is great. If you're a giant company and you naturally get a lot of attention, okay, well, then maybe that it needs to be up to maybe 1,000 or so. So where you need to be in that area is something that requires a little bit of research up front.
And, if it's only 50 people, if it's the right 50 people, then that makes this a slam dunk, do it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Other questions, why would your target market listen? It's not just because you have good voices. There has to be information, entertainment, something imparted. And also, why are you podcasting, right? Why are you doing this in the first place? Is it to raise sales, raise prospects, raise awareness, all of the above? Sit down and talk deeply about this.
I mean, for us marketing types, that really means what part of the funnel are you trying to address?
Yes.
Is this the top of the funnel thing, or is it a conversion thing, or is it a loyalty thing? And that also, of course, is a function of the audience, whether it's existing customers or prospects or whatnot.
It can even be used as ongoing support too.
Absolutely. Some of the great ones are like that.
Yeah. So step two, understand what it takes. It takes a commitment. It takes time to build up an audience. This is not, let's do 1 or 2 and see if it works. This is let's do 10 or 12 until we see if it works.
If you want to relax that, then instead of commitment, you say be deliberate. Because if you are going to do like 4 episodes, then you better know that up front. Now, we see podcasts that are literally like 6 episodes only, but usually those are serialized stories that somebody's telling. And
or a serialized, in business, like a serialized product overview and support thing.
Right, exactly.
For instance.
Exactly. And then usually those end up being part of a bigger umbrella that actually becomes the thing that you're supposed to have commitment to.
Now, we know that all of you are professionals, very smart people, very smart marketers. So your content is not going to be just product pitches, right?
Right.
Everybody should be nodding right now. However, everyone who says we're not just going to do product pitches, a lot of them end up doing just product pitches because it's the low-hanging fruit, it's easy for them, and they feel that it's compelling.
But really, it's mainly because you're under pressure by other people, usually the boss variety, who may not be marketing types themselves, who really just say, I'm in front of the audience, I'm going to ask for the order, I'm going to really talk about what we do better. And I think it's important to resist it because it doesn't take a lot of product pitchy topic content to turn the whole thing into a product pitchy thing. And if you
Yeah.
are going to have an ongoing relationship with your audience, you want to be really gentle about it and look at it from their point of view, and resist that when the pressure comes.
Exactly. And this is an audio format, but there's nothing out there that says you can't add slides to it and make it also a video format. Very easy to do technically. Doesn't add an awful lot of overhead to the technical side of it.
Also, it's true
This,
that some of the
yeah,
services that carry podcasts can actually carry a video too. But the problem is that when you listen to it on your phone, the video tends to have to be on, and you can't like put your phone and sleep and still listen to video. So that becomes a user experience problem.
yes, yes. This next topic is a pet topic of mine. It's the chemistry between the hosts, which adds up to the chemistry between the hosts and the audience. And all good, in my mind, all good, for instance, TV shows aren't plot driven, they're character driven. That you look at a Seinfeld or a Friends, Seinfeld was kind of a show about nothing, as they said, but it's the chemistry between those characters in the stupid situations they got into and how those characters reacted to stupid situations or everyday situations that kept us tuning in for what, 10 years? It's really key to have that sort of chemistry as much as possible with your podcast hosts.
It really does. And even for the shows where the topic and the content is just superb, and you as an audience maybe don't really kind of care who is delivering it, if you listen to that same show 2-3 times in a row, you really do develop a relationship with the persons.
Yes.
And it is important that that chemistry be something that they're comfortable with and that they are able to project. And in fact, as a result of that, some of our clients actually like ask Dan to be a host of the show, or ask me to be the host of the show, because they don't want to do it. They don't have anybody they can assign. And we'll say, okay, then or let's go find somebody else who can do it.
Yeah, mostly me, they ask, but still.
Of course, because Dano, of course, delivers a lot more chemistry than I do. I'm more into physics.
I reek of chemistry. Anyway, technical skills. You're going to need some. Not a lot, and we're going to talk about it in depth, but you do need some technical skills, or someone does, to produce the podcast and manage the distribution.
Yeah, this is really where a lot of the services, the online services and software packages come in. So the technical skills and outreach are really a function of your budget. If you want to do a quick and dirty thing, and if you're a startup and don't want to allocate a whole lot of money into this, there are entirely very valid ways of doing it that doesn't cost you a whole lot or nothing at all. You can just make it work with all open source software and a little bit of your own activity, and we can tell you how to do that. But if you want to dial that up, or if you don't have someone who's really interested in pulling up their sleeves, then you probably need a service that you can subscribe to. And they're not too bad.
No.
They're really on the order of, maybe a couple $100 to $1,000 a year.
And outreach. You're going to have to get listeners here, or why do we care? And we're going to talk about that in depth as well.
All right.
Okay. So develop your podcast personality. Just as we've kind of developed a personality for this webinar, you need to do the same thing. Starts with a compelling name. Should have something to do with what you're talking about, so people get an idea of what they're signing up for. Episode frequency, this is a big deal. It can be pretty hard to keep up with a weekly cadence. We think every 2 weeks is probably good for a new podcast, but every month is okay to start with as well.
Absolutely. We've had cases where we've done one a quarter, or one every 2 months, or one every. So it's okay to start slow, also because your audience needs time to pay attention to this. If I subscribe to a new podcast from a startup, and within a month, I'm already 6 episodes behind, I'm more likely to just like stop listening to it because I think, well, I missed the boat and there's no way I can catch up. So you want to make sure that you go with the same pace with your audience, and you recognize that if you've got 50 people who subscribe, not all 50 are going to listen to every episode. And only when you get to 3, 4, 5,000 subscribers can you then go to a weekly show And that's also a lot of work for editorial
It
calendar
is.
and production and this, that, and the other. So going slow is really good. Also, it allows you to speed it up if you can, but not
It's
set up.
hard to slow down. It's easier to
Yeah,
speed up.
exactly. Exactly.
But I would also insert here that if you're going to go quarterly, people might forget,
That's
right?
also
I
true.
mean, they might,
Yeah.
they might have listened to you once, thought this is okay, then they don't see you again.
Right, right.
Episode length. We think that probably 15 to 20 minutes is good for a new podcast. You can go longer, but you can't outrun your content. That's the thing. If you have good enough content to fill up 30 minutes, 35 minutes, 40 minutes, that's great, but that content needs to be good.
Yeah. In general, the shorter the better, but not too short so that people still kind of want to hear. You want to cover the material properly, so to say.
Yeah, and I listen to podcasts that are an hour and over, but not very many of them,
Right.
because there tends to be a lot of repetition, and they don't have strong enough content to hold my attention that long.
Right. Step
So,
4.
step 4.
You want
Welcome
to
to
get
step
your
4.
step, well, as you, the fourth step, you want to get your tech right. So there are
Yes.
really several ways to record and produce and publish. As we said earlier, it is okay to have participants in the same room. If you have separate mics, it actually is better to not have participants in the same room, because some of the tools that allow you to record locally through either Skype or Zencaster, which is really a tool that a lot of people use now because it records you separately on your own platform and then uploads it to the cloud at the end. It is very important to have a headset so you don't get an echo through your laptop. Sometimes that works if you're in the proper room and there's not echo, but those echoes are really hard to get out in post-processing. So you want to avoid them from the get-go.
Yes. Having edited many a podcast, the really important critical thing is to have something that's easy to edit. And having voices on separate channels is by far the best way to go, because that way you can adjust volume up and down. You can take out crosstalk. If somebody lapses into obscenities, you can take those out and do it without harming the other channels. And
It's
that's
also
really
great
important.
it's also great for your guests because it makes recording easier. So they don't have to look like
Yes.
and be prepared, and so they can stop, they can back up, they can say, let me try this question again. And you can either, you can rearrange all of that in post-processing if you have a voice per track. So that's really a critical requirement.
And production tools, Shaheen prefers Audacity because he's cheap and it's free.
It is the open source tool of choice, Audacity. It runs on Mac and runs on PCs. If you're doing your own audio processing, it's either that or Adobe Audition if you're an Adobe fanboy. If you're a Mac Apple fanboy, GarageBand really works quite well. So really, you do need a voice audio processing software. And if you hire someone to do it, well, then you don't care. They're going to do what they want. And the output is all the same, so you don't really care. It's not like if they do in PowerPoint or Keynote, you're going to get different files. You're still
You don't need we're not looking for a
MP3s or
symphony
waves.
hall here.
Right.
And one last note here is that some of the services that we've been talking about do include editing tools, but make sure you give those a test drive and run a couple of podcasts through them before you sign up, because those editing tools can be pretty primitive online.
They are very primitive. And in fact, audio processing, it's going to be hard. There are services that throw in some audio processing, but what they throw in is really very primitive. It's like, you tell me exactly from what time to what time, and I will just remove that part. And here's my price for that. And if you really want involved audio processing, you either want to do it yourself or you want to allocate a good amount of budget for doing that. So all these professional podcasts that you hear, they've got a whole studio and they've got a few sound engineers that work on this. And that's why it sounds as good as it does.
But that said, you can give yourself a really good podcast if someone will spend an hour or two learning the tools.
Really, yes,
Yeah.
yes.
Step 5, get your distribution right. People have got to be able to listen to it. One first recommendation, get some episodes in the can before you go live. So that's production talk for let's have 2 or 3 episodes done, at least 2. So you understand the workflow, you understand the time it takes, you understand the production steps and how to get your podcast sounding and feeling how you want it to. That's a
So
lull, Gene.
yeah, we had a little bit of a lull.
Avoid lulls.
Avoid lulls. That's another thing. But if you do audio post processing, you can do that. So there are literally tens of services that are out there that help you record and host and distribute. And if you spend the right money, they will just proliferate yours and put all the ID tagging and meta tagging and RSS feeds and all that. Some that come to mind are services like Blueberry or Buzzsprout, Transistor, Podbean, Simplecast, Spreaker,
That's enough.
on and on, on and on. These are the ones that we either have used or like seriously looked at, and really all of them are fine. And if you've got the budget, doing it is fine. The one thing that really, there are 2 things that you really want is at the end you really need an RSS feed. So if you can find an RSS feed to do it either through FeedBurner or through SoundCloud, those are easy ways of doing it. That's one way to do that. However, the question is, who's got the custody of your actual MP3 files? Is it you or is it some other service? So if you put your audio file elsewhere, then you better be cognizant of that. So you certainly want a backup of it yourself, because if you ever let go of the service or if whatever happens to them, but then it really reduces your control. So our recommendation, and when we do it, we really try to recommend that you actually host your audio files yourself if you can. If you can't, then SoundCloud is kind of the next stop, but then you have to get the paid version of it for it to hold all those files.
Yeah, I think most companies out there are going to have a website, and
Yes.
that'll be a place to have those. And like Shaheen said, you want to be, in that place where podcasts are, and you want to be at least on iTunes, Google Play, and Spotify, and being on those can be automated.
Yeah, and once you have the RSS feed, actually joining them is really not that hard at all.
So step 6 of 6, push, push, push to build an audience. You've got to push this out just like you'd push out anything else, any other piece of marketing collateral or your blogs or whatever. You need to use every bit of ammunition in your marketing. What do they call it? I think it holds arrows. Whatever that's called, use everything in it.
You want that. That's right. So it does take time to develop the audience. As I said, if you're a big company and you've got millions of followings anyway, you are going to get listeners. But if you're a startup and if you're a smaller company, or if you're trying to break into this, it's going to take you a while, and you better know that going in. So really, then your social media advertising or your organic boosting or all of that becomes its own mini marketing project. One thing that really helps you with that is the derivative content. If you have your podcast and then you turn it into a blog and you turn it into a slide cast and you turn it into a video and you get snippets out of it and tweet those, there are really a lot of different ways to merchandise that content that really will help. And then the other thing that helps while I'm on a roll here is to either get somebody like your partner to join or to sponsor it or to lend their voice, or indeed sponsor other podcasts that are very popular.
Yeah.
Advertise your podcast in those podcasts.
It's a good idea. Very good idea. And last thing we want to leave you with here is that this is all part of something we call human marketing. And what's going on, this is something that we've spent literally weeks and weeks on developing, and it started when the world changed with the COVID virus, that everything had to go to online, to digital, and people are typically at home looking for some things to take up their time. And this is a great time to embark on a new podcast series.
Really, the idea is that with what's going on right now, and this was always true, but it's just been amplified, is that there is essentially a new audience because people are now looking for conversations online. They are a little bit isolated. They're looking for new content. They don't want content that's really targeted at search engines. They want targeted content that's targeted to human beings. And what are those contents? Those are things that are authentic, they have empathetic, and they really are advocating for their success. And all of that is really leading to new digital because you need to now humanize your digital. And how do you humanize your digital? Is by not just by being, emotionally so visible, which is not a bad way of doing it. You still can be all business, but your all business needs to be human. And that means a focus on people. And the nice thing about it is that it is leveling the playing field, is that the quality of engagement is more important than the size of the company. If you are able to authentically connect to your audience, it really doesn't matter whether you represent a big giant corporation or a small company.
So finally, as we wrap up and get ready to start taking questions, let us know if we can help. We do this a lot. As Shaheen said, I think we probably have closer to 600 podcasts between us, but we can help on anything from developing your own human marketing to developing your own content, including video, podcast, collateral, etc. We do a lot of hosting of educational webinars and promotional podcasts for others. So we're only an email away. And
Right.
with that, why don't we open up the bin and see what we have for questions?
All right. There's one already online while you get prepared with the ones that came before. This is from Tim. Thank you. It says, I listened to your Radio Free HPC podcast, which I only discovered recently, probably because of the lockdown. It's great, by the way, so thank you. Yes. I was wondering, do you do the post-production and editing yourselves, or do you outsource it? If you do it yourselves, how much time does it take per podcast? So we do it ourselves because one of our big tenets at OrionX in general is that everything that we offer, we have done at least once ourselves. So we kind of get a better feel for what we're talking about. And depending on how much quality you want with the audio, it is a very broad spectrum. It can be anywhere from 20 hours per episode if you're going through and taking every M and A out, and you may have to rearrange sentences, and you got 5 tracks because you got the 4 co-hosts and you've got the
couple of guests or something like that.
So really, I would say anywhere from, at a minimum, like 4 or 5 hours to maybe 25 hours per episode.
Depends on the length of the episode. I think 25 hours is insanely long.
Exactly.
When I do it, I can do it in probably 3 hours for about a half-hour episode.
I think typically what Dan says is what most people do, and you'll be fine. But again, if you want to be like really studio quality, count on a lot more time. All right.
Here's another question. We're just starting out. How much budget should we allocate to social media promotion? What kind of range? What do you think, Shaheen?
Oh, I think social media per episode, I would say on the order of, range would be, to me, would be like $500 plus or minus. That would be fine to start with. And you would establish a baseline and you would see how it works for you. If you can't do that, then I would start with maybe $200 per episode and see where that gets you. I think a lot of that really is a function of just how much budget you've got, but you also have to decide, this is a whole digital advertising thing. So you have to find the venue. Is it Facebook, or is it LinkedIn, or is it SEO, or what avenue gives you the best targeting, and also just how effective it is for you. You may get 8,000 impressions and 3 conversions, and that's a really expensive way of doing it.
Another question, what are the 2 or 3 best metrics to determine success of a podcast? Is it number of subscribers, subscriber growth, ranking on iTunes, etc.? This is a tough question. Reason why is because it is so hard to measure good metrics for a podcast. This is one of the reasons why I suggest that you keep your podcast, that your source audio is on your website. And that way, what we end up doing for our Radio Free HPC podcast is looking at the size of the episode in megabytes, and then looking at how much download, so how much download bandwidth has been used by that episode. If we have one that's, let's say it's 100 megabytes, and if we get a gig out of it, well, then that tells us that 1,000 people downloaded it and listened to it. Or they might have listened to snippets. We just can't tell.
But fundamentally, podcast metrics are really hard. And they are really hard even if you use other services that claim to have excellent metrics. Like when you look at iTunes podcasts, iTunes metrics, or Spotify or Google Play metrics, and they're really supposed to be very good at it, even they are not as good at it. So lower your standards and expectations when you look at podcast metrics. It's really difficult to tell whether I downloaded and I listened or not. It's really difficult to know whether I downloaded 3 times, whether I downloaded and listened to the first 20 minutes and then not the rest. And how many spam calls did you get that downloaded, but they're actually not listeners? So I think the only way you're going to do it is by doing it enough until you get a really good feel for it. We were doing a podcast, and this was on SoundCloud, and we had like 3,000 listeners to just this one episode. And I was joking that our guest's mom had it on continuous loop. and I reached out to SoundCloud, and they really didn't know what was going on. So, it was really hard. So, yeah.
Okay, final question, and this was a write-in question. How long can your podcasts live, and are they removed if there is inactivity?
Well, if you host it yourself, then of course you have it forever.
Yeah.
And like for Radio Free HPC, it can go all the way back to episode 1. If you look at a bunch of other,
which we recommend everybody does.
Absolutely.
Go to episode 1 all the way up through 273.
Yes. And then there are also some AI-oriented tools that do the transcription if you want to pay for those. So now you have the transcription that goes with the podcast, and that also helps you with SEO. And that would be the better way of doing it, yes.
Again, that's why we recommend that you host your own podcast and just use the services to distribute it.
Yes.
Well, with that, I thought we did an okay job. At least we skimmed over the surface of it. If you have any detailed questions, just send us an email and we'll do our best to give you answers.
Yeah, really. I mean, as you, those of you who know us a little bit, better than others know that the whole point is your success. So we'd love to get on the phone or bounce on an idea formally and informally. We'd love to work with you. So thank you.
Happy to talk to you about that. Thank you very much for being there. We really appreciate it. And we'll see you on our next OrionX webinar.